Hey everybody, Chris here. Just a quick heads up before we get started. If you're planning a trip to Wyoming, we recently released 2 trip prep training programs, one for 10 Sleep, one for Wild Iris. I built the Wild Iris plan myself, having tons of experience there of all grades up to 13D, and the 10 Sleep plan was built by our coach Taylor Fragomeni, who climbed her first 510 through 13B in 10 Sleep. And these are 7-week training programs, so best to get started about 8 weeks out. 10 Sleep has a coaching option with Taylor, and we have 3 different levels of each plan: 511, 512, and 513, each built with the specific things that you need at each grade in those specific areas, and they come delivered on our mobile app. Each exercise has videos and descriptions. It's all laid out for you with weekly progressions, with a taper into your trip, and a resource library with tips for climbing in the area, what to pack, best routes, all sorts of things. So if you're interested, you can find out more at powercompanyclimbing.com/trip-prep or right there in the description for this video. All right, enjoy.
Maybe don't know.
This time, this time, this time, this time, this time to build, this time to build, this time to build, this time, this time to build, this time to build, this time to build, this time power, this time to build power, this time to build power, this time to build power.
What's up, everybody? I'm your host, Chris Hampton.
And this is Taylor Fragomeni.
And Taylor is one of our coaches, a climbing coach with Tangent Climbing, setter, climber. What else are you?
That's basically it. Really
That's
interesting.
it. That's my whole identity.
It. That's all I am.
And right now you're based in
St. George, Utah.
Did you say that with a country accent for a
Did
reason?
I don't know. It's maybe it's the Utah accent that's coming out. Utah.
Pretty sure there was a little country
Utah.
accent in there.
That's how people say it there. I don't know.
But you spent a lot of time in Bozeman, and 10 Sleep, I assume, is one of the closest big areas.
Yeah, I lived in Bozeman for 8 or 9 years. And 10 Sleep was only 4.5 hours away. And so we always used to zip down there on long weekends, and I'd do some longer trips in the summer. It's a pretty special place to me. I've been climbing there since I moved to Bozeman in 2011. Yeah, we always used to joke that the best climbing in Montana was in Wyoming. And yeah, it was easy to go there all the time. I think I climbed almost everything from my first 10C to my first 13B there, which is kind of crazy.
Really?
Yeah, I've probably climbed there more than anywhere else.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that when I asked you to come on and do this.
Oh, really?
What, when, how to train for 10 Sleep. I knew you'd spent a lot of time there,
Mm-hmm.
but I had no idea it was that much. That's very cool.
Yeah.
Like your formative years.
For sure. Yeah, that canyon has seen many versions of me, for sure.
Let's talk a little about the 10 Sleep style. I feel like, it's a really similar rock to here in Wild Iris in some ways, but the style is pretty different.
It's very different.
So talk to me about what the style of 10 Sleep is.
Yeah, so I would say it's predominantly technical, really. It definitely there are pockets for sure. They don't climb anything like the pockets in Lander and in especially like Wild Iris, for instance. And there's actually quite a bit of variety in 10 Sleep. I think it gets put into this category of being like all vertical tech climbing, but there are crags that are more powerful and there are crags that are steeper. There are shorter routes and longer routes and lots of in between. But yeah, overarchingly, I'd say it's pretty technical. A lot of directional holds. There's a lot of options on the routes, which is really nice.
When you say directional holds, just for the folks who
Mm-hmm.
may not quite understand what that is, let's explain there.
Yeah, so not much down pulling. Lots of positioning your body around side pulls and gastons and being able to kind of shift your weight over your feet in a way that is going to optimize those holds.
That's good to know, because when a lot of people think of technical, they just think of tiny crimp, step on a little foot, tiny crimp, step on a little foot.
There is that too.
So there's also a lot of like positioning your body to make moves work.
Yeah.
So the body position side of technique, if you will.
For sure.
Is there any characteristics to 10 sleep beyond the like climbing style type of holds, but what else do we need to know if we're planning a trip there, first time there? What's 10 sleep all about?
So, well, let's go like logistics first. 10 sleep is a very small town. There's not a huge grocery store there or anything like that. So coming in, you definitely would want to stock up on groceries either in Warland, which is about 30 minutes west of 10 Sleep, or Buffalo, which is east of 10 Sleep by about an hour and 15 minutes. And those are kind of your options for bigger grocery stores. There is a little market called Dirty Sally's in town that has some local produce and stuff like that, and some basics for groceries, but you'd want to stock up ahead of time for sure. Weather-wise, it can be kind of volatile in the kind of shoulder season. So a lot of people go there July and August, and those have like always been the busiest seasons. They used to be kind of the prime season, but more recent years, it's been really hot those months. So now kind of on either side of that, like late spring, early fall, tend to be a little bit better if you're trying to go red point things that are hard for you. But one of the cool things about 10 Sleep is that there's loads of climbs at every grade. So if you're just going to like get a bunch of volume in and climb a lot of rock climbs, and you like hanging out with a lot of cool people, then July and August are great. There's nice creek running all through the canyon that people tend to hang out in during rest days and stuff like that. One of the other things that's really cool is that I like this at least. Some people wake up in the morning and are ready to go rock climbing, and you can do that there. But 10 Sleep is kind of characterized by these slow starts to the morning where you can wake up, have your cup of coffee, read a book for a little while.
Is this just you, or is this 10 Sleep?
It could be a little bit of both. I don't know. But yeah, a lot of people hang out and like don't go up to the crag until the early afternoon. There's climbing on both sides of the canyon though, so you can. I was going to
ask you that.
Yeah.
I've only been there one time. I've
Really?
driven through several times, only climbed there one time.
It's only 2 hours from you.
I know.
I'm actually not surprised by that.
But the crags around here are only 30 minutes from me, so.
It's true. It's true. It's hard to leave and go anywhere else when there's awesome rock climbing right in your backyard.
Yeah, exactly. So there are climbs on both sides of the canyon.
There are, yeah. So there's stuff that gets morning shade and stuff that gets afternoon shade. But the more popular crags that most people climb at are on the side that gets afternoon shade.
Got it.
Yeah.
Hence the late morning starts. Yeah. What are approaches like? Do people need to be in like super cardio fitness mode, or?
So those vary quite a bit. There's some crags that are basically roadside, and then there's some that are like a 45-minute hike to an hour. One thing to keep in mind is that if you live at lower elevation and you're visiting 10 Sleep, you might feel it a little bit when you're there. The crags kind of range in elevation from around 6,000 feet at the bottom of the canyon up to almost 10 at the top of the canyon. And I know even for myself, like living in Montana and frequently going into higher elevation areas, whenever I was there for a longer period of time, it always took me like maybe 4 or 5 days to feel like I wasn't just absolutely sucking wind on the hikes higher up in the canyon.
Yeah. If you're not super
Yeah.
like used to changing altitude, or if you're coming from Ohio, for instance, and you've never been in the mountains, the difference between 6,000 and 9 or 10,000 can be a gigantic difference in, in the oxygen and in the temperature and the weather. So you probably need to pack quite a bit of different clothing. Does that sound right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm one of those people that will like always bring my puffy to the crag because I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it.
Yeah, that's a real thing in Wyoming that does not exist in like Kentucky or the East Coast nearly the way that it does here. And if it doesn't matter if it's 100 degrees in town, you should bring a puffy to the crag.
Exactly. Yeah. And a rain jacket's probably a good idea as well. It doesn't tend to rain there for more than, I don't know, maybe like an hour at the most, but a lot of the times when I've experienced rain there, it's been very short-lived. But, sometimes it might rain and you want to walk back to the car and not hide under the cliff. But a lot of the time you can hide under the cliff, and the rock luckily dries really fast and is fine to climb on after rain.
Yeah, that's another good thing to say, I think, because it's not really soft sandstone. It's a pretty hard rock. Wyoming is really dry.
It's that dolomite.
So it can be totally dry 10 minutes after a rain, especially if it's windy.
Yeah, it's
which
kind of
Wyoming
wild, actually.
is often windy.
Yeah.
So definitely not the same as if you're climbing in, the soft sandstone area.
Yeah, and some of the craziest thunderstorms I've ever witnessed have been in Ten Sleep too. I don't know if it was just happened to be there at those times. But I think the canyon is oriented west to east, and weather generally moves west to east. As it comes up the canyon, I think the air tends to compress and the storms get more intense the higher you are up in the canyon, which is kind of crazy. Sure. So that could be a thing to keep in mind too.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Equipment needed. So beyond just rain jackets and a puffy, is there anything we need for the climbing? Like, in rifle, if you didn't bring knee pads, you're not going to enjoy yourself nearly as much.
Yeah.
What's it like in Ten Sleep?
So you don't really need knee pads much in Ten Sleep. I'm one of those
is there
people,
anywhere in Wyoming where you need knee pads a lot? I wonder.
I don't know. Not that I know of.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to
I
think
always
about
put one
that.
in my pack just in case. You never know.
Same.
There's a few climbs there where it'd be nice to have one, but they're definitely not like generally necessary. A stick clip is a good idea. A lot of the routes are bolted with the intention that you're stick clipping the bottom. It's just nice to have in general.
Yeah, I think it's a good bet. Sport climbing in general, but some people still leave them at home.
True story. A 60-meter rope is going to be fine for most things, and there's generally notes in the guidebook or on Mountain Project if a 60 wouldn't be long enough. You do need to bring draws. So this is we joke about this in St. George all the time because almost everything is fixed now.
Yeah.
And we're like, oh my gosh, I had to bring my draws to the crag today. But in Ten Sleep, there are very few routes that are fixed. If you're there in the busy season, like July and August, there's generally going to be draws hanging on a lot of the more popular routes. But it's a good idea to bring a bunch to the crag. And
don't count on those that are hanging.
Yeah.
Check them before you clip them.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yep, definitely. There's some that I've definitely pulled from there that were just up for many seasons and not in very good condition. Yeah. Shoe wise, I think most people prefer like a stiffer edging shoe. I kind of like having 2 pairs. So some of the crags, like I said, are more like bouldery, less edging and more smearing. And it might be nice to have like a softer shoe for those crags. But generally people prefer things like Squamas or Solutions or katanas or whatever, something stiffer for edging can be nice. There's a couple approaches where you do cross Ten Sleep Creek. So there's a higher approach for French cattle ranch that you walk across the creek, and that one's a little bit spicy.
Is it a deep creek? Like, what's the creek like?
It depends on how much snow melt there was from the year, how much it snowed for the year. There is a line running across the creek, but it's more of it's definitely not like Tyrolean status. It's kind of just a hand line, and it's actually not in the best place to cross. It's easier to cross higher up in the creek, but it can be. There's been times I've crossed it, and it's been like a mid-thigh height.
So you want to bring something that you aren't afraid to get wet.
Yeah. Yeah. And you'd want a pair of shorts, obviously, for that too. A lot of people will just bring like an extra pair of socks or an extra pair of pants if you're doing that approach. But there is an approach that doesn't require you to cross the creek to get up there as well. It's just a little bit longer. And then going to the psychoactive wall lower in the canyon in the Lee Creek area, you also have to cross the creek. That one is way more mellow. So the French Cattle Ranch one is like near the top of the canyon, and the Lee Creek one is near the bottom.
Got it.
But it's just nice to have. Also for just hanging out on rest days, if you want to hang in the creek, especially if you're there while it's hot, it's nice to have. The creek bed's pretty rocky, and so it's nice to have a pair of like chacos or
that's good
water
beta
shoes of some sort.
It also just sucks standing around all day in wet shoes that have just been collecting dirt all day long.
Yep.
Yeah, it sucks. Bring something else. Length of routes. What's the, what are we looking at?
It's so hard to answer that question because there's a lot of variety. But like I said, like a 60-meter rope is fine most of the time. I think I can think of one scenario where I was actually like end-to-ended an 80-meter rope. And it was kind of like happenstance. There's this route at Valhalla that people climb the first pitch kind of frequently. I'm totally spacing on the name of it right now. But the first pitch is like 10B, and then there's an 11B extension off of it. And it's very slabby. So we were just, looking up at it from the ground like, yeah, this is fine. Slab, if you're unfamiliar, looks shorter from the ground than it actually is. And I went and climbed up to the top of it, and it just happened that we had an 80-meter rope that day. That was what my friend had brought because it was all she had. And I had totally ended it on the way down. It was like, crazy. Climbing forever. But that is very unusual there. And even in that scenario, like there's a midway anchor, you could pull it down if you needed to.
Got it.
You didn't have enough.
So I feel like, Wild Iris, especially if you're going to Ten Sleep from Wild Iris, you can almost get away with a 30-meter rope at Wild Iris most of the time,
Yeah.
I carry chopped ropes up there. I do not carry a full length rope up there.
We did that the other day.
So definitely, switch that rope out if you're headed to Ten Sleep.
Yeah, 60 will be good for just about everything.
Yeah, let's talk about prime season to climb there. I think it's really busy in the summer, and it's gotten busier and busier.
Yeah.
Over the last decade, 8 years, something like that.
Yeah, I'd say especially in the last 4 or so.
Yeah, it's gotten steadily more and more busy.
Yeah, it's kind of wild because it used to be that like I said, I started climbing there in 2011. It used to be that you'd maybe run into 2 other parties over the course of a whole weekend. And it was always people from Wyoming or Montana or maybe Idaho. Now it's just a totally different landscape there. It's kind of wild.
Yeah. And I assume it's like it is here in Lander, where summer is one of the better places to go, but it's not necessarily the best time.
Yeah.
What are the spring and fall like there?
So they are obviously cooler, which is really nice. Again, also if you're trying to send hard things for yourself. But the weather can be a little bit more tricky. You might get those storms rolling in and out of rain or snow for that matter. But again, they tend to be pretty short-lived, and any snow is generally going to melt off at that point.
Is there like snow consideration in the canyon where you can't get to parts of the canyon if it snows? Like wild iris is pretty much out until the snow melts off. You know?
Not unless you're like really pushing it, probably. For Crag 6, which is like one of the highest, it might be the highest actually, as far as like the main climbing areas go in the canyon, you do drive a dirt road for a while that is a little bit hilly to get out there. And if it's wet, the road gets very slippery. It's kind of like clayish mud.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something to keep in mind as well, as people tend to get stuck trying to come back up the hill to get out of there.
And that's a pretty popular crag,
It's
right?
very popular, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's one of the coolest spots you can go to. And there's a wide variety of climbs there, and they're all really cool.
Yeah, that's good beta too. You know, if that's where your goals are and you don't know the area well, might be harder to get there at the end of the fall or beginning of the spring or something like that. Let's talk how you should prepare for a trip to Tent Sleep.
The cool thing about Tent Sleep is that you don't necessarily need to be like crazy strong to have success there. If you are a technically sound climber, then you're going to have a good time, which is nice. So we could just talk about that a little bit, even like certain drills that could be helpful. For the more technical crags, like somewhere like French Cattle Ranch, where it's more vert to slightly overhanging, crimpy, really sequential climbing, having a good understanding of, like, there's lots of options on the climbs. Having a good understanding of how to figure out beta that works well for your body is going to be really helpful. So years ago, I came up with this drill for one of my team kids that kind of struggled with more intricate movement that I called creative repeats, where he'd have to climb a boulder like 3 or 4 times, but with a totally different sequence each time. Just to kind of learn how to see the possibilities a little bit of what can happen on a route, and not necessarily just falling right into what the intended sequence is.
Yeah.
Or what everyone else is doing.
It's one of my favorite things to do outside too.
Yeah. And I'm like one of those people that tends to use different beta than most other people do. So yeah, trying to explore that a little bit and teach yourself to see the different solutions to things can be really helpful, because there are multiple solutions a lot of the time. Another one, if you're not super familiar with climbing on limestone, especially limestone that has a lot of feet on it, understanding how to be able to distribute your weight over 2 feet instead of between 1 foot and a hand or whatever is going to be really helpful from an efficiency standpoint. And that's easy to drill in the gym as well. You can just, instead of doing a 1-legged drill, you do a 2-legged drill, and maybe you use open feet even, and just kind of get a feel for how to distribute your weight when 2 feet are on the wall, because sometimes it's easier to have 1 foot on, but
yeah, and you might find that shifting your weight a little bit in one direction makes a much bigger difference than you thought it would.
Exactly.
And it's going to be,
especially with those directional holds.
Yeah, it's going to be totally different than if you're climbing with 1 foot on, which it used to be actually that I saw more people needing to work on climbing with one leg, but now as gyms have gotten more powerful and more dynamic, climbing with one leg at a time is more and more common. So maybe getting back to that technical, getting your weight over 2 feet is an important thing.
Yeah, being able to balance between that point definitely helps. And then another thing, with a lot of the time with less steep climbing, especially, we're grabbing a hand and then building our feet really high to reach really far to the next handhold. So understanding how to walk your feet up is really helpful too.
Man, super important.
Yeah. And I really like the tic-tac-toe drill for that. So every hand move you do, you have to do 3 foot moves. But it was always so funny having our team kids do this, because they would just tap footholds really quick with their feet. And don't do that. That's not going to help. You have to actually transfer your weight from foot to foot as you walk your feet up.
Yep.
That'll be really helpful as well. So those are like the big technical standpoints.
I think that one's a really good one.
Yeah.
We should talk about for a second, because
Sure.
if you're a gym climber and most of your time is spent in the gym, then you're almost always in this paradigm where you're looking for the footholds. And oftentimes what you're talking about is when a foot's so high that you can't really just step up to it. You have to sort of paddle your feet up the wall to get in place, to be able to put your foot on and shift your weight over this foot. And that might mean you're stepping on things that don't look like footholds to you.
Exactly.
Just smearing straight on the wall, and finding the way that you need to weight those is really valuable practice for climbing outside, particularly in technical areas.
And part of that comes from the wall angle too. On steeper terrain, you can just move your hips away from the wall and high step maybe a little bit more easily. But on thin holds, on more vertical terrain where you have to stay tight into the wall in order to hold on and keep your weight over your feet the whole time, you can't really do that. And that's where that walking up becomes more encouraged than just like having the hip mobility to high step.
Yeah. Another thing I like to do for folks to help them kind of learn that paddling their feet up the wall is, especially if you're in a gym that has a textured wall of any kind, it's going to be a little harder on plywood, but absolutely still doable. Get on a vertical wall and just try. You may not be able to do it, but try to match your foot where your hands are over and over, just to see what happens, almost like you're mantling onto every hold, because it's going to force you to have to lean away from the wall a little bit, apply pressure so that you can get your foot high enough, just on the wall, and then try to rock over it.
Yeah.
And I think it'll teach you a lot, even if some of the moves you try like that are impossible.
Totally. Could try just standing in T-nuts. That's always a fun thing to do too.
Yeah,
to walk
totally.
Your feet up.
That's a really important point. Like your gym probably doesn't have any small footholds.
Probably not.
Most gyms do not.
Yeah.
The holds that you think are small footholds are giant in comparison to some of the little tiny feet that you're going to find on limestone. Even on 5'10s, 5'11s, you're going to find tiny little feet that are way smaller than what you're climbing on in the gym.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's worth stating too that trying to practice turning good footholds into bad footholds in the gym is going to be helpful too.
Yep.
So what I mean by that is like intentionally standing on a poorer surface of the hold, or maybe if you've got a blocky hold, maybe you stand on the side of it instead of on the outside, or on the top rather. That can be a really helpful thing to practice as well. Stand in the bolt hole instead of standing in on the actual hold. Stuff like that.
Exactly. And if you've got a home wall, of course, buy our tiny little feet.
Of course.
We've got a bunch of them. So. Is there a grade in 10 sleep where things seem to shift? Like, in some areas, it's 512 becomes this grade where you really have to learn how to shake out, or your finger strength has to be considerably better to make this leap from this grade to the next. Like, for instance, in Wild Iris, the pockets are pretty big until you get to 513, and then all of a sudden you've got some pretty small, heinous little pockets. And I don't know if maybe there's one 514 in Lander that doesn't have a mono on it.
Wow.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Is there something like that in 10 sleep where you see a big shift happening?
I'd say, I think, once you hit 513, the holds definitely get smaller by quite a bit. But again, I keep getting pulled back to this variety piece. I think a lot of it is relative. Like if you're trying something that is hard for you, like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of options on routes. And so having the skill of memorizing beta is going to be really helpful, because it's, easy to forget when there's 6 different footholds you could stand on for a move. But maybe you have to stand on the one, and that's how it works for you.
Right.
So I think that's a really big thing once you're projecting at all.
One thing I think could be valuable is if you're in a gym where the setters and you can talk to the setters, mention to them that you would love to see some boulders put up or roots put up that are edges that aren't just down pulls. Setters love to get feedback and to have, goals in mind for folks.
For sure. At least they should.
Yeah,
they should love it.
Exactly. So a lot of setters are going to really appreciate it if you're like, hey, I've got a trip coming to Tin Sleep. I would love a route that's just like side pull edges and gas stone edges that force me to get my feet high. That's going to give them something to do that's creative. So
yeah,
ask for that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, and as the beta memorization stuff goes too, like I think a lot of the time people get caught up in remembering hand sequences and they forget to think about the foot sequences. And since a lot of the climbing there is more foot intensive, you got to practice memorizing the foot sequences too, for sure.
No, I think that's a real thing for sure.
Yeah, it's something we don't think about in the gym because a lot of the time it's like, oh, you just grab this hand and then there's the one foothold.
Right.
So.
Exactly.
Yep.
Is there anything you've done in Tin Sleep that you really had to train for and is a proud thing for you?
Yeah. So the first 13B I ever did is called Power Pie. It's at the dry wall, which is lower in the canyon. And that one, it's super cool. It's you kind of climb like this really chill, like cracky feature for a minute, and then the wall kicks back and you have a long boulder problem. I don't remember exactly how many moves it is. It's probably around 15 or so. That's just really small, like sharp crimps and cool drop knees and stuff like that to get between them. Because again, none of the holds on it are down pulling really. And that one, it was cool. I was going down there a lot. Like I think it was October actually, and so the weather was really on or off. I just went like a few weekends in a row, and was getting closer and closer, but was falling like near the end of the boulder. And so when I would go back to Bozeman during the week, I'd just try to get a couple sessions in of just doing 3x3s on like crimpy boulder problems in the gym. And just that quick little power endurance adaptation was enough that I was able to pull it off. But it was like, it's a memorable one because it was kind of like the perfect send where I like stuck the move I'd been falling on and then like almost fell 2 moves later. It was like just teetering off. And then you still have like some 12A climbing into some easier slab after that crux boulder too. So yeah, just a little bit of power endurance was helpful on that one, which I think is the case on a fair bit of the routes there.
I think especially with power endurance on that style of climbing, one of the important things to think about when you're in the gym is like, it's not the like classic picture of power endurance we have where you're just lunging and falling off, but grabbing the holds anyway and somehow staying on. And a really important thing to practice is keeping your composure and not letting yourself completely fall apart, standing on little feet and grabbing little holds and practicing being calm, cool, and collected to the best of your ability anyway, in these 3x3s or, whatever it is that you're using to train your power endurance. I think that's a really important part of it.
Yeah, 100%. I think people really miss out on that with power endurance exercises a lot of the time. Like it's not just about building the physical adaptation, but you got to be able to stay calm when you're pumped a little bit.
Yeah, that's definitely a real thing when I would noticed very early on, long before I was a coach, that when people got pumped, their footwork was the first thing to go. It would just be feet scrabbling around everywhere. And in a place like Tin Sleep, you might not have that opportunity. In the red, feet could scrabble and they're going to land on something big.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen that way on technical limestone.
No. Yeah.
All right, let's take a quick commercial break. We'll come back, and I would love to hear some of your like favorite routes, the must-dos, the classics in the area for the folks who are planning a trip and getting overwhelmed looking at the guidebook. These are the things they should be doing. If you're listening to this episode while planning a trip to Wyoming, then we have got you covered. We now have trip prep training programs available for both Wild Iris and 10 Sleep. 3 levels for each area, 511, 512, and 513. These plans are delivered through our mobile app with videos for each exercise, many of which have been developed specifically for the demands of techie 10 Sleep limestone and powerful Wild Iris pockets. You'll get weekly progressions, a flexible schedule that can fit nearly any lifestyle, and tips for making the most of your trip to the area. Go to powercompanyclimbing.com/trip-prep to learn more, or you can find the link right there in your show notes. All right, we are back and talking about 10 Sleep, what, when, how to train for 10 Sleep. We've talked a little already about the logistics of the area and some of the things you should keep in mind when you're training. But if you're planning a trip to 10 Sleep, now's where you get the beta. Let's talk about the absolute must-dos. These are the ones at each grade or so that sort of just say this is 10 Sleep when you're climbing these routes. 510 or under.
So the ultimate classic in the area is called Beer Bong, and that's at the Downpour area, and it's 10B, and it's just some low angle climbing up into this crazy like scoop chimney feature. And the reason it's so classic is that you can actually turn around and face outward into the canyon as you're stemming up it, which is a gorgeous view and just a very like it's got quite an exposure factor for being a 510. And that's kind of the one that like everyone's got to do that one.
That's really cool.
The 510 degree.
If you go and you climb it, you should absolutely do it facing out.
Yeah, you've got to.
I've only done a few routes where I'm stemmed out across something facing out from the wall. And it's always such a unique experience that it's super memorable.
Yeah, and the way the feature is formed too, when you're stemming out, there's just like air underneath you, basically.
Yeah,
and so
cool.
It's just kind of a crazy feeling.
That's very
But it's
cool.
very cool. There's this other route that's maybe like a lesser known good one called Death Flake from Hell. And that one's at the, oh my God, I'm totally blanking on the wall.
They'll find it in the guidebook.
Yeah, they'll find it.
Actually, I went and found it for you. The wall where Death Flake from Hell can be found is Wall of Denial.
It's this really cool, super long 10A that gets steeper the higher you get on it, and kind of climbs this like crazy, like melted looking rock. And I think the reason it isn't regarded as one of the classics is when you're like standing looking at it, it kind of looks like Choss, but I promise it's not.
Yeah.
And there's this cool like just hanging feature and crack that kind of like you follow up, but it's mostly just like sinker jugs, and it's really cool.
The name of this route is actually a thing I've been like grappling with in my brain a little bit, like the way that we talk up these things to be either super hard or super scary, and they may not be. And oftentimes that like romanticizing that we do about these things hold people back from trying them. So I've been grappling with that because part of me really likes it, you know, calling things badass names. And then the other part of me is like, but nobody's ever going to try this because now they're afraid of it.
It's already looks intimidating. And then with that, it being named that, I think if you're a 10A climber, you're probably like, I don't know if I'm going to do that one.
Yeah. So if you are a 10A climber, go do it anyway.
Yeah, it's fun. I promise.
And then you get to tell your friends you did the Death Flake from Hell.
Yeah.
So.
And it's not at all sketchy.
I love it. All right, how about 511s? What do we got there?
All right, there we've got Circus in the Wind. That's at the Circus Wall. It's a super classic 11B. The Circus Wall is kind of tucked up in a side canyon, lower in the canyon, so it's just a really cool setting to begin with. You're in like a tighter little canyon, and it's a beautiful like blue and yellow streaked wall. And for that matter, there's actually a 10B on the right side of that wall called Step Right This Way. That's also really cool and climbs a sharper ret at the top. But Circus in the Wind is just a really cool, pumpy, beautiful 511. The wall is just amazing and definitely worth checking out. There's not a lot of routes at the wall, so it can get busy if there's a few parties up there, so that's something to keep in mind. But it's worth trying to go do that one. Face melter roof at Valhalla is also really cool. I think this one has become a little bit more popular in the last few years. Just a really crimpy, like cool 11 BC. The first pitch of it is lower angle 10A, and then you climb out a bulge and up onto a head wall that is a little bit steeper and nice and techy. Lots of those directional holds we've been talking about.
I'm just curious, when some of these climbs are getting really popular, how does the rock at Ten Sleep handle it? Does it get more polished the more popular it becomes?
Yeah. Unfortunately. Yeah, it's kind of wild actually, especially in the last like 5 years or so, how much routes have changed.
Yeah. I personally quite like the polish because it makes me feel really nervous and anxious. And
you get really good at holding your body tension on those.
Yeah, I sort of like that feeling when I'm sport climbing.
Yeah. I like it sometimes. It kind of depends on the situation, I think.
But just something to be aware of. And and that's exactly why we developed our resistors and our diodes that are footholds that are just all the shiny half of Dultex, just to force you to create that same nervousness and anxiety in the gym.
And it's worth mentioning too that if that's not something that you want to do, I had a really hard time making this list because there's so many routes in Ten Sleep that I just love and would climb over and over again. So even the ones that are like, 3 stars and below, a lot of the time are really, really enjoyable. And so it's easy to avoid the stuff that's more heavily trafficked and still have an awesome time if you want to do that.
Yeah, that's good to know too.
There's also another route at Valhalla called Hanoi Hilton. That's an 11D that has some really rad sequences on it. It's kind of got a more bouldery start and then slabs out a little bit in the middle and then kicks back onto this overhang and has some really cool pocket moves. And that one's more of like an under the radar classic. I don't see people on it as much, but it's really good.
Is it like an abrupt change from slab to steep near the top?
Yeah. Yep. So you've got like the hard bouldery beginning that's slightly overhanging, and then you probably climb like 5-8 for a few bolts on this slab, and you could stand like no hands below the overhang, and then it kicks back and gets it bouldery again.
I think that's a cool opportunity for folks. In a lot of the modern day sport climbing, we don't get those chances to like change angles that often. And I think the slab to overhang angle it's a really common angle in like more adventurous climbing. And it can be a little heady going from easy slab to a steep wall. So
yeah, and something I totally forgot to mention earlier too, as far as like skills that are important to have in Ten Sleep, being able to rest on route is a big one for sure. But pacing is huge because there can be variety in the difficulty of the climbing on the route. And this is just true for sport climbing in general, I think. But if you're used to primarily climbing in the gym, things tend to be set to be very consistent.
Right.
And that's not generally the case there. So understanding how to change your climbing pace, whether that is tension or effort or speed, is going to be helpful as well.
Yeah, that's important. And, for the folks who may not have ever really, really delved into thinking about pacing.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say it's a general rule that technical climbing is a little slower? As it gets steeper, you should be moving a little faster? Or what's your thought there?
I think that's a general rule for sure. Like everything with climbing, there's always going to be exceptions. You know, if it's low angle terrain that's easy for you, then maybe you can just run through it and save your feet a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you're really comfortable on that terrain, then you can move more quickly through it, even though it's tenuous. And then with the steeper stuff, obviously you're on your arms more. If you're someone with endless endurance, then maybe you can afford to move more slowly. But if you're not, then being able to pick the pace up a little bit can be helpful. But since a lot of the holds in 10 sleep, even though they again don't climb like the pockets of Lander, are pockety. Sometimes you can't like move super fast through certain overhanging sections. You might have to slow down and be a little bit more precise. So that can be something to keep in mind as well.
Got it.
And you can play with it in the gym by like making link ups or just artificially changing your speed and kind of noticing when it makes sense to do what and why.
That's a cool idea. The link up, like find two sort of disparate styles that are near each other and find a way to link between those two and have to change your style and your pacing mid boulder, mid route.
Yeah, and you can do it multiple times even. Like a lot of gyms have more than one route per draw line. And generally there'll be like an easier one and a harder one. And so you could play with, you know, climbing the easy bottom into like a boulder problem on the harder one and then going back to easier and vice versa.
Yeah, I like that.
Just learn how to do that a little bit.
Let's talk 512. What are the
512s.
must-dos?
Sleight of hand at the drywall. This is lower in the canyon again. It's 12A. It's very cool. Just very classic 10 sleep. Vert, techie. A harder boulder at the bottom, but still very continuous after actually. So we get that variety piece in there again.
You're all about the variety.
There's
here.
a lot of variety there. Well, everyone's always like 10 sleep is soft and everything's vertical, and that's just like not true. But
it's funny because I used to be the exact same way. Like when people would be like, "Well, the red's just overhanging endurance." I'm like, "No, it's not. It's got this, got this, got this." But in doing all of these episodes, everybody I've talked to, when I'm like, "Let's talk about the archetypal style, like the style everybody thinks of," and everybody's like, "Well, there's all these other routes too, and we have to talk about them." You know, I'm like, okay, I get it.
All right. So yeah, sleight of hand is archetypal 10 sleep for sure. Very good. Not as heavily trafficked because the drywall is not one of the most popular crags, and it's also generally if you're there in July and August, it's going to be too hot to climb at that wall because it's lower in the canyon. And it gets sun most of the day. But if you're there in the shoulder seasons and you just want to climb the ultimate 10 sleep style, then sleight of hand is a great one.
That's the one.
Yeah. And the next one I had was this route called Tricks for You. That's at Super Radic. That one's also 12A. That one I have a fun story about. This one is also archetypal 10 sleep style. But I remember there being up at that crag one day and there was kind of a bit of a storm rolling in. You could you can smell it in the air. You're like, there's thunder coming. But I was like, I gotta do this route. The draws are up. Like I'm gonna go up and clean it. I want to climb it. And this one's a little bit more slabby and it's very, very techy. A lot of small crimps. And as the storm is rolling up the canyon, the wind is picking up more and more. I remember being on the techie like slab near the top and just trying to like run up the slab between gusts of wind because I was getting like blown off the wall basically. It's really balancy, and so like a gust of wind could easily teeter you off balance enough to throw you off the route.
Mm-hmm. And Wyoming wind can be vicious.
To hold on, but it was very memorable for that reason.
Awesome. Yeah.
That one is really cool, and I don't think that one gets as much traffic as it probably deserves as well. And then in the 10 or the 12 plus range, one of my favorites is Esplanada, and that one's 12D. I think the guidebook says you'll swear it's 13A. But it's really cool. That one's at the Grasshopper Wall in FCR, and it's really interesting because that wall tends to be very crimpy, technical, a lot of edging and stuff. And Esplanade kind of has a different style, even though it's nestled in with all of those other ones. It's bigger moves between pockets and more in-cut holds. It's a little bit steeper at the bottom. More power endurance-y for sure. And then it's topped off with just a techie, less steep boulder problem that spits a lot of people off. So it's one of those ones that when you do it, you're either relieved or, maybe you're sick of it at that point. I don't know. People fall going to the anchors a lot on that one.
I actually love it the most when it's like a techie slab sort of boulder at the top instead of like some hero boulder problem that finishes with a dyno. Falling off there makes sense, but when it's turned into super slabby and just no holds, it's really frustrating to have a hard time up there, and I love that.
Yeah, it's really cool, and there's some options on it too, and so you might figure out one beta and then get up there on the red point and be like, oh, this is not the way to do it on the red point actually. And so I think that gets people a lot, and the holds get smaller at the end too. So if you're pumped from all the more powerful climbing earlier in the route, there is a decent rest beforehand, but it's not the best rest in the world. It's on like a flatter hold. But yeah, it's so funny. That one was one that I was falling off the top over and over again in August one year, and then went back in September when it was colder and did it easily. Like, what on earth just happened?
That's the way it goes, I think.
The temps help at that wall for sure.
All right, 513 and up. What do we got? I've heard a lot about 513 and up routes in 10 sleep over the years.
So many.
I'm curious to hear your favorites there, or your must-dos there.
Yeah, there's a lot. It's so hard to choose. But I think Dances with Cows is the neighbor to Esplanade, and it's 13A, and it's very different style actually, which is sort of funny because they share an anchor. They don't share any climbing, but they share an anchor. It's a great one. I think it's a lot of people's first 13A. It was my first 13A. There's a lot of options through the crux. It's very thin. And also has like a little bit of like a red point crux at the end. That's a little techier. But that one's very classic. A good one to do. I also had Blue Light Special on here, which is its neighbor. Very similar. Both of those are...
You like this crag.
I do like that crag. I like all of them. It's so hard to choose. That one is very 10 sleep, continuous crimping, very technical. Some pockets as well.
You keep saying continuous crimping. It makes me feel like I have to now go and...
I'll be there all of September,
actually
Chris.
do some of this.
You can come climbing with me.
All right, count me in.
All right, great. Cool, I'm going to hold you to that. Yeah, and then I haven't climbed any of the 514s there, but people really like Galactic Emperor. That's also at FCR. That one's been getting a lot of traffic in the last couple years. It's got kind of a hard boulder at the bottom and then some easier climbing, but it's still hard because it's 14A.
Yeah.
And then a bit of a stinger crux at the top too, I think.
Cool.
People have been into that one.
Since you had a hard time choosing through all these grades, let's narrow it down even further, make it even harder.
Okay.
Pick a favorite. And I'm going to tell all the other routes that you chose this one as the favorite.
God.
So
all right.
All of your children are going to be upset with you.
Okay. Well, this is tough. But I feel like the routes that I choose as my favorite always have more to do with like the overall experience than the actual climb itself.
Of course.
So if I had to choose one, I think Hala at Crag 6 would be the one. That one's 12D. That wall is probably about 100 feet tall. It's one of the taller walls in 10 Sleep. And Hala has like a bit of a crux at the beginning and then a nice rest. And the reason that I had such a great time on this one was because of the beta that I used through the middle of the route. And I was trying it with a couple climbers that were like over 6 feet tall. And I'm 5'5". I'm not short by any means, but I'm not 6 feet tall. And there's this one section, it's not a crux of the route by any means, but they were just like back flagging through and reaching from pocket to pocket on it. And for some reason, the positioning of the foot it didn't feel good to me to like do the move statically. And so I just launched off of a lower foot and kind of did this crazy barn door toss. And then you have to traverse across on some smaller pockets. And they were kind of matching across, but the feet were just low enough for me that matching across felt like it was spanning me out too much to the point where I couldn't load the feet as well as I wanted to.
Yep.
So I ended up doing this barn door toss into a full rose move, like fully turned around, like head under my
Hero
arm.
shit.
Yeah, and it was so cool. And I remember coming down at one point, and one of the guys that was tall that was trying it was like, dang, that looks like way more fun for you. And I came down, I was like, maybe this beta is stupid, but it's so cool. I'm like gonna do the route like this. And it worked out really well.
I love it.
And it was such a funny one too, where the day that I sent it, I was like feeling kind of trashed and not that psyched, but I was like, oh, whatever, I'll just try it one more time. And I ended up doing it that go, but I remember getting to there's one last kind of slopey-ish rest before the red point crux. And I hate resting on route. I get so impatient. I just want to keep climbing. But I hung out there forever because I was so shocked to find myself up there that I was like, okay, here we go. I think, I'd only been trying it for a couple of days. I think my previous high point was probably like halfway up the route or something like that. I was like, here we are. I'm not even sure I fully remember the red point crux, but
the preserve the send rest.
Yeah.
Stay there way longer than you need to.
Yeah. And the view at the top of that crag, like when you clip the anchors and look out, is just amazing too. And so that's one of my favorites, mostly because of the flying barn door toss into rose move sequence. That was really cool.
That's the first time I've ever heard all of those words put together
I know,
in one
right?
sentence.
It's a unique experience. That's why it's one of my favorites.
I love it. What about the overlooked classics? What are the hidden gems around 10 Sleep that you've done, nobody ever talks about, but they're out there?
I think I mentioned Step Right This Way already at the circus wall. That's just a unique feature, which is really cool. It's like super sharp arête at the top of the wall. That's a good one to do if you find yourself up at that wall. This next one is definitely a hidden classic because I don't think people climb it very much, but it's called Pre-Spice Below. It's a 10C that is at the El Dorado Coral Club, which is an area in FCR that has a lot of 510s, but doesn't house like tons of classics really. That wall's a little bit chossier, but this route is really cool. It kind of climbs up this huge detached block, and it's really long. But you're climbing on the left feature for a while, like up in a arête at the bottom, and then you're kind of climbing on this slab, and then the wall tips back, and you get closer to the main cliff. On the feature that you're climbing on, and you actually stem between the main cliff and this cool hanging arête, and it's just a really unique position to be in. I hadn't really climbed a feature like that before, and then eventually you get higher on the route and you have to transfer back onto the arête. That's cool. The other cliff, so that one's pretty cool.
I love anything unique like that.
Same, yeah. That wall also has an 11A called Crossbow Chaos Theory. That one's maybe not so much an overlooked classic, but I don't always hear people talking about it a lot. It's just a really cool 11A that has a little roof in it, a little roof pull, which is fun. I already mentioned Hanoi Hilton earlier. Pump Me Like a Shotgun is another 11D. There's so many good 11Ds in 10 Sleep. That's at Valhalla in the munitions area. It's easier slab climbing into a steep bulge that's just like cool pulling on jugs. That one's really fun. It's pumpy for sure, hence the name. That one's great. Vulcan Jessery at downtown area is one of my favorite 12As in the canyon, actually, and I've done a lot of them. That's one of the only ones that I will climb like basically every time I'm at the crag. It's super long, very 10 sleepy. Again, archetypal style.
10 sleepy.
10 sleepy.
I like that.
Yeah.
I hadn't even thought of that, but I like 10 sleepy.
Yeah. It's kind of pumpy. It's technical. There's a lot of crimps and pockets on it. It's somewhat continuous. Really, really cool one. That's one where having the ability to like rest in kind of poor stances is going to be helpful. Or just having enough endurance to not have to. I phoned a friend on some of these. Was like, what are you guys think are the overlooked classics? And she mentioned If Dreams Were Thunder, which is a 12B that is at the sidewalk buttress lower in the canyon. I've never climbed that one actually. Maybe I will when I'm there in September.
Oh, I like
now
this.
that I know that. But that one I think it's like 20 bolts long or something like that.
Wow,
that one's
cool.
Monstrously long. Maybe you'd need a 70 meter for that one. I don't know. If I'm remembering correctly, is a cool like roofy overhanging arete type adventure.
Cool.
Yeah. And then here we are back at the grasshopper wall. There's a 13A there called Slim Jim. That's just the right of Esplanade. I put draws on it last year, and then people were climbing on it, as they do when you put draws up on things that don't normally have draws on them.
Yeah.
That one's actually pretty cool. It's funny because it's nestled in with all these 5-star routes, and so I think people are like, oh, that one only gets 3 stars. Like, who needs it? But it's kind of rad. It has a hard boulder at the bottom, and then some easier climbing, and then another crux up high into some like techie slab climbing.
It sounds like if you're taking a trip to 10 Sleep, you should just go to the grasshopper wall.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a 513 climber, you will be psyched, most likely. Unless you hate crimping and standing on your feet. And
unless you hate good rock climbing.
Unless you hate good rock climbing, then you should reconsider.
And
that wall is very busy, though, is one of the things that
that's what I was going to ask.
Say. Yeah, it's one of the more popular walls in the canyon. And so it's funny, I haven't climbed there as much the last few years because there's just always like, there was one day I walked past that wall last year and there had to be like 25 people there. And there's only like 8 routes on the wall.
Yeah.
So that's something to keep in mind. If you're there in the shoulder seasons, it's definitely worth it. But it is higher in the canyon, so the weather can be a little bit trickier too.
Sure.
But the nice thing is, you can go up there and just see what the deal is. Sometimes you'll get lucky and everyone's resting for the day and there's not many people at the crag. So it's easy to go there and check it out and then walk to walls that are on the periphery, like have a backup plan, basically.
Yeah, that's one of the things I like about 10 Sleep. Lander sort of has this setup as well where all the walls are sort of connected. Is there a best place in 10 Sleep to go for folks who have like a big group of people that they're with at a wide variety of grades? I think that's more and more common nowadays to have a 513 climber climbing with a brand new climber, and everything in between. So where should those groups be going? Yeah,
this is one of the great things about 10 Sleep is that there's actually a lot of options for that scenario specifically. Downpour wall is really great. There's everything from like 5.7 to 13 plus within the area.
Cool.
And downtown is really good too and tends to be less busy. There's, again, within like a less than 5 minute walk, there's everything between 10 minus and 13 plus. And FCR is good for that. You've got, that one's a slightly more spread out. So, you might find yourself like more scattered if you're in a group. And that one is maybe slightly, there's a couple good 510s up there, but that one's maybe slightly better if you are in a group that's like, we have people that want to try like 11 plus 12A and people that want to try like 13 plus, up to 13 plus.
Got it.
So that's something to keep in mind too. Lots of classics up there.
Is that French Cattle Ranch area one of the more popular areas?
It is, yeah.
I've heard that name a lot more than the others, and it's the only area I've ever climbed at. So.
Oh, okay, nice. Yeah, so especially the Shinto wall is just this big, beautiful wall that has a bunch of, like, everything on it is like 11D to 12C, I believe. That wall is really, really popular for climbers that are working in that range. And then Grasshopper is the other really popular one in that zone. But there are other little pockets of climbing in between there. Oh, there's also the back 40 wall up there too, which is very similar to Shinto, but is all like 511 climbs. So it's kind of fun because you've got like those three walls, Shinto, back 40, and Grasshopper are all like the archetypal 10 sleep walls. And one's like mostly 511s, one's mostly 512s, and one's mostly 513s, which is kind of
cool
rad.
To have. Yeah.
And they're all within like 10 minutes of each other, maybe.
Awesome.
So, yeah. And then Crag 6 is a good option for that as well. Again, that crag can also get busy, especially in the hotter months. It gets a little bit more finicky in the less hot months because that is the highest crag up. But there's everything from 10A to 13D up there as well, I think.
Yeah,
so.
It sounds a lot like the Red, where there's just lots of variety in terms of grades all over the place.
Yeah, and Crag 6 is cool too because there's kind of like three walls, and the rightmost wall is kind of tucked away, and it's I think there's only 3 routes on it, and a couple of them are 12A, but they're really short and bouldery. They're like 4 or 5 bolts long. And then you have the middle wall called the Rap Stars wall that is that massive 100-foot cliff that I was talking about earlier. That is just like kind of a scooped overhang. It gets a little steeper near the top. And then you have like some easier climbs in the middle, and then the third wall over is like more mid-length, like bouldery routes. So you have a little bit of everything there. You've got
That's
like
cool.
The moderate boulders, the super long enduro routes, and then like the punchy bouldery mid-length routes.
You're getting me psyched to go to 10 Sleep.
Great. We're going. It's happening.
Rest days. What's your this is one of the like troubles with small towns, I think. Tiny little western towns is that there's not a ton to do on rest days unless you're just psyched to do things in the outdoors, which is also great. But what do you do on rest days in 10 Sleep?
You have got to be able to chill on rest days in 10 Sleep a little bit. There's not a lot to do as far as the town goes, for sure. A lot of people, including myself, will just hang out by the creek. You can go swimming, and that's pretty nice. A lot of people just like do work during rest days, but if you're on vacation for real, then you don't need to do that.
Just rolling your eyes at me as you said work on rest days.
No, I would never do that. Don't lie to the listeners. There are cool hikes like higher in the canyon. You can, if you are like an active rest day person, going for a hike is a great thing to do. It's really beautiful there. You could go scope out whatever crag you're trying to go to and see what the deal is.
Are there good restaurants in town?
I'm such a bad person to ask about that because it's like small town Wyoming, and I'm like vegan and gluten free.
Oh yeah.
There are a couple. So there's like the Sleepy Coyote.
I think there's a brewery in 10 Sleep
the
now.
10 Sleep Brewery. They don't generally have food. They'll have like food trucks sometimes that come.
Got it.
But their beer is good, and a lot of people do hang out there.
I've also heard a lot about Dirty Sally's ice cream.
Yep, yeah, that's definitely a rest day activity. Just go hang out at Dirty Sally's and eat all the ice cream.
Yeah.
Yep.
Do you have first off, are you an ice cream eater if you're vegan?
No.
No.
That would mess me up at this point, I think.
I'm going to ask Lana.
I like coffee, though.
I'm going to ask Lana to tell us her favorite ice cream from Dirty Sally's because I know Lana's very detail-oriented in her ice cream.
I know. We actually were just talking about this a couple of days ago. I ran into her.
You are normally, like, very against me recording you. You were strangely non-combative this time when I asked.
I mean, we're talking about ice cream. I'm willing to talk about ice cream pretty much anytime to anyone on any platform.
I figured
That's how strongly I feel about it.
Yeah, I figured that was probably the case. And sadly, I have developed a lactose intolerance. So I will never eat at Dirty Sally's, most likely, unless I just accept that my stomach's going to hurt the next day, which is
worth it.
But is it?
Well, can you just take one of those pills?
I haven't tried that yet. Maybe.
That seems like worthwhile, at least, to try.
Okay. I'll give it a shot. When we go to 10 Sleep, I'll give it a shot.
Okay.
I need to know, everyone out there listening needs to know your personal favorite Dirty Sally's concoction.
I will say that I'm a little leery to share this out and put it out there only because they often run out. And now I feel like I'm only increasing the chances of them running out. But
do it for the greater good.
For the greater good, because I'm not one to gatekeep my ice cream secrets.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're going to go to Dirty Sally's and you're going to get ice cream. That's just a no-brainer, especially since you're probably in 10 Sleep in the middle of a hot summer and you climbed all day. So it's going to taste extra good already. But then you have to make some decisions on your flavors and size. You're going to get 2 scoops. That's the right choice. And so you have to choose a cone or cup, a receptacle large enough to accommodate such a capacity.
A receptacle large enough to accommodate.
Well, I'm just saying. And I prefer a kid's cone, like a sugar cone, because I like how the ice cream sinks in the bottom better. But if you're a waffle cone person, go for it. I just find those to be a little more drippy, at the bottom.
I find it hard to believe that you don't have a strange hatred for waffle cone people.
No, I mean, they are larger in general. And so I can see the argument of accommodating more ice cream, and I could never argue that,
Okay.
It's a personal preference. So to each their own, as long as you can get all the ice cream in there that you need. And you need 2 scoops because you have to get 2 different flavors.
Got it. I just know you as a judgy person, so that's...
I reserve my judgments for the important stuff.
Got it.
So the key here is you need your ice cream to be 2 scoops and you need 1 on the bottom and 1 on the top. No side-by-side bullshit. So if you get a cup, make sure you specify this. And on the bottom, you need a scoop of Graham Slam because that's going to have a little bit of a crust flavor to it.
Graham Slam.
Graham Slam. It has chunks of graham crackers in it.
Got it.
And then on top of that, the second scoop has to be Huckleberry. And so then what you have to do is you have to strategically take your bites so that you get a little bit of Graham Slam and a little bit of Huckleberry in there.
Wait, how do you do that? If one's on top of the other?
Yeah, you have to eat where they meet, Take your bites in the middle. You have to be smart about it. It takes a little practice. And then every bite will taste like huckleberry pie. It's amazing.
Do you get it all over your face trying to eat in the middle of 2 scoops?
If you're doing it right. It's worth it.
What do we call this?
Ice cream is just so good.
Is it on the menu?
I mean, all the flavors are just on the menu and you just choose whatever you want. I don't think that specific combination is noted in any way. But this ice cream is just also the best ice cream in the whole world. It's my favorite. And it's hard to find. It's Wilcoxon's ice cream, which comes from a small town, Livingston, Montana. Yeah, I'm not lying. It's also the only other place that I've found it. I mean, I think you can get it in groceries and things in that area. But if you're not living there, like we are, even if you're living kind of close, which we are, you still can't get it here. But where else you can get it is if you are in Yellowstone National Park. It's their official vendor ice cream. So all the concession stands in Yellowstone during the summer also have this ice cream.
Got it.
But I think it tastes
Harper's down there making
better.
noise. She likes it.
She likes it. She's going to have it this summer. I do think something about it, though, tastes the best after a long day of climbing at Dirty Sally's.
Do you have a name for this concoction?
Heaven?
Because
Huckleberry
you
pie
and I both
in
are
a
people
cone.
that love to smush names together and give different
Yeah,
names.
maybe
So
I
what is
should.
this? I think there needs to be a play off of Graham, as in grandmother, grandma.
Maybe. I don't know, but it's the best. And I mean, sometimes they're out of flavors. I think they run out of Grand Slam pretty frequently because it is that good. So you may have to make some substitutions, which I've had to do in the past, which I don't prefer, but you got to do what you got to do. So, I don't know. I wish everybody the best of luck that they will be able to experience this. If you think that you're going to run out of time, go in the morning before you go rock climbing. Get a little boost for your day. It doesn't have to be at the end of the day. Make sure you check their hours. Dirty Sally's hours can be a little wonky sometimes, depending on the day of the week. Just do what you can. Prioritize it. Prioritize the ice cream.
Get your grandma's huckleberry pie.
Yeah, it's so good.
Grandma's
I'm already dreaming about it.
huckleberry pie.
It's the best part of every 10 sleep trip I've ever taken. Every time.
Not the rock climbing, the ice cream.
The rock climbing is great. The ice cream is phenomenal.
Okay. Well, we're going back to the episode now.
Okay.
Coffee. Are there coffee shops?
So Dirty Sally's has coffee as well.
Got it.
So you can get coffee there.
Okay.
That's kind of it, though. There's not much to do in 10 Sleep if you're looking for like fun activities that are not outdoor related.
Yeah, there is. Thermopolis is how far away? Do you know?
I don't know, but that's like between here
It's
and there.
between here and there, so probably an hour,
it can't be more
hour
than an
plus
hour or
a little. And Thermopolis is a cool little hot springs town.
That's definitely an option too.
Has like pools that are fed by the thermal
Mm-hmm.
hot springs, and so they're in different temperatures. Some are really hot, some are more like swimming type pools, but none are cold water.
Yeah.
And those are kind of neat and fun. And there's a lot of fossils and dinosaur stuff in the museums there.
I've actually never gone there.
It's a pretty neat little area to explore. Feels really touristy, so if you're in for that kind of thing.
Yeah. Buffalo is an option too. Like if you...
I don't know if I've ever been to Buffalo.
Yeah, so that's like east of 10 Sleep. So you actually drive up over the mountain pass, and it's really scenic drive. And Buffalo is a little bit bigger of a town, so they've got a couple grocery stores. They have a couple coffee shops. They have ice cream as well. And there's a public pool there that is free that also has free showers, and so that's nice too.
Cool.
Yeah.
What's the camping situation like in 10 Sleep?
So there's the 10 Sleep Rock Ranch is like the hub, the scene hub. If you're not into camping in the same place as a ton of other people, the old highway that kind of parallels the newer highway that goes up the canyon is just a dirt road that you can camp anywhere along it, basically. They generally have, during the busy season, they'll have a couple of porta potties along the old road, which is really nice, and you should definitely use those if you're camping in that area. And at the bottom of the canyon, like right at the start of the old highway, there is a Forest Service campground as well. And there you can actually camp for free in the off season, like when it's closed. So you won't, like when it's open, there's a campground host and there's water and stuff like that. There's like a dumpster to use, but the amenities get taken away in the off season, and you can camp there for free, which is pretty nice.
Cool. And I know that the Rock Ranch has, Wi-Fi and showers and kind of a shared like cook space, I think.
There's a sink and a fridge that are shared.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, there's not like a kitchen space, but the creek hang there is awesome. Like they've built benches and stuff there, so it's a good spot to like go hang out if you're on a rest day and you want to be able to have Wi-Fi. There's no cell service in the canyon, which is something I haven't mentioned yet. So that's something to keep in mind.
I didn't realize there was no cell service there, so it's kind of
I love it.
rifle-esque in that way.
It's so great. Yeah. You can just go and unplug for a few days.
Yeah, it's nice that you can get Wi-Fi in there when there's no cell service. I'm all about no cell service, but no Wi-Fi is really hard for me to spend more than an afternoon in.
Yeah, yeah.
If I can't work, it's game over for me. So
yeah, and in the busy season for the camping, if like the Rock Ranch will fill up for sure. You can make reservations there at certain points in the year. But if that's full and you drive up the old road and that's also pretty full, because there's a lot of sites along the old road, but some places are more flat than others. And if you're like camping in your car or looking for a good tent spot, then there's a chance that on the busier weekends, like that will fill up as well. if you keep driving higher up in the canyon, there's all sorts of Forest Service roads and stuff like that. So you can always find something.
Yeah,
There's a lot of free
Wyoming's a
camping
pretty
around
easy
there.
state to camp in. You know, some of the western states are not so easy.
Yeah.
Wyoming's pretty chill. There's also a local climbers coalition, the Bighorn Climbers Coalition, that I think we should definitely mention. You know, those folks do a lot of work in that area for access and replacing bolts and things like that. So
trail work.
Yeah.
There's generally a couple, at least, days of doing work at on the trails or at the crags, because some of the crags have pretty bad erosion at this point. So they'll go up and build platforms and stuff like that. So it's a little bit nicer.
Yeah, so consider, looking into those folks and donating to the Bighorn Climbers Coalition, and we'll have a bunch of other details in the blog post about guidebooks and restaurants in town and places to stay, closest airports, things like that in that blog post. So the links will be right there in your show notes. Go check those out if you've got a trip coming up or considering a trip and looking at the logistics. I'm psyched now. So
you guys, I got Chris Hampton psyched on sport climbing. It's
so
happening.
I think I'm going to see you there in September. You're going to have to remind me because I'll get psyched in another direction before then.
Oh, don't worry. I'll remind you.
But as of right now, I'm psyched to get to 10 Sleep.
Great.
So, thanks for this. I appreciate you sitting down and chatting about it. I love hearing about the places that people love, especially if I haven't been there. So thanks.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, don't forget to check out the trip prep plans for both Wild Iris and for 10 Sleep. Taylor applied her expertise to the 10 Sleep plan, so you can expect to see some of the drills and concepts that we talked about here, as well as many more. And these are 8-week programs tailored to the specific demands of the area. The first week is a prep week, and then 7 weeks of training that builds strength and stamina, followed by power and power endurance that then tapers into your trip so that you can show up prepared. We have 3 levels of each program, 511, 512, and 513, so that you can find the one to fit you. You can find those at powercompanyclimbing.com/trip-prep or at the link in your show notes. You'll also find ways that you can work directly with Taylor, either through us or through her company, Tangent Climbing, and links to follow her on the socials. We are at Power Company Climbing on the Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, but never the Twitter, because we don't tweet. We scream like eagles.
This time, power. This time to build power. This time to build power. This time to build power. This time